All right, let's look at our last argument, William James and the living forced momentous choice. This argument, like Pascal's wager, is a very different kind of argument in its strategy and in its goal from the other arguments we read, the cosmological arguments, the arguments from design, the fine-tuning arguments. See if you can spot how this argument is different from those. Okay, so James's first premise. A living choice is a choice about something relevant. A dead choice is a choice about something irrelevant. Okay, all we have to do to accept this premise is agree to these terms for this particular argument. If you're good with a living choice and a dead choice meaning what he claims here for the purpose of this argument, then we can consider the first premise true. Premise number 2 says a forced choice is a choice one must make. That is, not choosing it results in some de facto choice. An avoidable choice, though, is a choice one can postpone or avoid without de facto choice occurring. So I'm driving down the street and a squirrel runs out in front of my car. I've got 3 choices I can make. Actually, I've got 4. Well, we'll go with 3 initially. I can swerve left, I can swerve right, or I can apply the brakes and hopefully avoid hitting this little critter. If I choose to do none of those, I'm going to plow right over the squirrel. So I've got to make one of those choices to avoid a de facto choice occurring in the absence of me choosing to go left, right, or brake. But if I'm in my parked car with the engine turned off and a squirrel runs out in front of my car and just kind of sits there and I want to go forward, I can get out of the car and go shoo the squirrel away, or I can wait until the squirrel leaves. I don't have to make a choice immediately. I have options. So that would be an avoidable choice. And again, these make pretty good intuitive sense to me, so I'm willing to go with premises 1 and 2. Premise 3 also seems pretty common sense to me. A momentous choice is a choice of great consequence. A trivial choice is a choice of little or no consequence. Again, I'm good with that. Now, premise 4 is going to get a little bit more complicated. When faced with living, forced, momentous choices, we should always seek objective, rational certainty to guide our choice. When objective, rational certainty is not available, we should make choices that are the most subjectively and pragmatically appealing. Okay, so you're going to have to think about whether or not you're willing to accept this premise. I'm willing to accept the first part of it for sure. When we're faced with really significant choices that we've got to make right now, we should always try to seek out the best information we can relevant to that choice, because the more we know about the situation that we've encountered, the more likely we are to wisely navigate our way through it. The less we know, the more sort of risk we're in. Now, do you also agree, though, when the rational certainty, objective rational certainty, is not available to us, and we need to make a choice, we can't avoid making the choice, should we go with what sort of seems best, what seems at the moment to be the most kind of practical thing to do? Is that the way you live your life? You have to make the choice here, right? Because you said it's a living forced choice, and it's a big one. And if you don't have rational objective certainty, should you just go with what seems good to you, what seems most practical? It doesn't seem like an outrageous strategy for life. Premise number 5 says the choice to believe or not believe God exists is a living choice because you are aware of the opportunity to decide whether or not to believe or not believe in an omniscient, omnipresent God. What do you think? Is the choice to believe or not believe in God a living choice? Is that a choice that you have available to you right now about an issue that matters right now? Premise number 6, the choice to believe or not believe God exists is a forced choice because not choosing is a de facto choice to not believe God exists. That seems true. Premise number 7, the choice to believe or not believe God exists is a momentous choice because your choice will determine the shape of at least your earthly life and potentially your eternal life. Okay. Do you believe that the choice to believe God exists or not exist is a momentous choice? Does it really matter? And again, I've said earlier that sometimes I have folks saying, like, I don't care if God exists, I'm going to be me, I'm going to do me, I'm going to live my life on my own terms. And saying, well, that seems perfectly appropriate for someone who doesn't believe God exists to say. But what if you did believe God exists? Wouldn't then your life look very different, perhaps, than it's going to look with you not believing in God? So if you believe in God, if you believe God exists, this particular God exists, the way your life unfolds is going to look different, perhaps, than if you don't believe God exists. And if you do believe God exists, and God does in fact exist, you have the possibility of eternal life. And certainly that would be different than if you chose to believe God didn't exist and maybe got excluded from the possibility of eternal life. So premise number 7 seems rational to me. Premise number 8, it's not possible to have objective, rational certainty to guide us in choosing to believe or not believe God exists. So one must choose what is most subjectively and pragmatically appealing. Premise 9, it is more subjectively and pragmatically appealing to believe God exists than to believe God does not exist. Therefore, God exists. Now, you'll notice this argument is different than all of the other. It's similar to the first arguments that we read in that it comes to a conclusion about the existence of God. The way it's different, though, is that none of the premises actually deal with any of the features of this God. It simply deals with possibilities and what kinds of decisions are better or worse to make given the circumstances that you're in. So it actually arrives at a conclusion that's a little bit sort of off from the premises, okay? But James is saying that if all of these premises are true, then you would come to the conclusion to believe that God exists. So he's kind of offering this conclusion with kind of I believe in parentheses before God exists. Now, as we rolled through this, I was indicating to you that most of these premises seem perfectly reasonable to me. They do. So then what are the premises that what premise is someone going to look at and say, I don't know so much about that? I think they're going to look at these 3. Okay, there are some people that are going to look at premise 4, and they're going to say, I don't think you should, when in the absence of objective rational certainty and in facing a momentous choice that's forced on you, I don't think you should rely on what's most subjective and pragmatically appealing. I think you should go with your intuition, they might say. I think you should go with your gut. Okay, that's fair enough. I can see somebody making that objection. Number 8, I think that somebody's going to object to that, and they're going to point back to things like the fine-tuning argument or the argument by design. And they're going to say, look, I've shown you evidence, objective evidence that exists independently of me, that it makes the most sense to believe a God exists. So we do have objective, rational, maybe not certainty, maybe that's the problem there, but we have objective, rational evidence from our experiences that would point to the existence of a God. Now, James might come back and say, no, I'm saying certainty, guys. I'm saying certainty, not probably. Number 9 is, we'll read about number 9 for our next thought primer. Number 9 is going to be objected to by people who are referred to as anti-theists. And the most famous anti-theists, they're not just atheists, right? They're not just people who don't believe in God. These are people that wouldn't want the possibility of a God, even if that were a possibility. So Christopher Hitchens, maybe I'll have you read something from Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens is probably the most famous, or was the most famous anti-theist. And his argument was, I don't think it is subjectively and pragmatically appealing to believe God exists. The idea of a full-time overseer who is always watching and judging my life and making arbitrary commandments about what I'm supposed to do or not do is terrifying to me, Hitchens said. That sounds very totalitarian, and I wouldn't want that even were it a possibility. And Hitchens goes on to say, I don't think it's a possibility, but even if it were, I wouldn't want it. So that might be an objection that we level against number 9. And of course, somebody like James is going to flip back on that and say, like, okay, that's a really pessimistic, sort of cynical way of looking at the existence of this God. It's not necessarily just what you've described, although that may be a feature of it, that this permanent overseer that's always judging what we do. All right, so there's our living, forced, momentous choice. And what we'll do is we'll chat on our discussion board about which argument you find most compelling, if any of them. Which argument you find least compelling. Fair enough.